Victor Hartman, a man who valued control above all else, was stunned when he saw his maid teaching his son to dance. But what he uncovered about her past would shatter his perfect world and change their lives forever. A story of secrets, second chances, and the power of unexpected connections. The Hartman estate was a sprawling masterpiece of luxury, nestled in the heart of the countryside. The mansion stood tall, its grand architecture a testament to Victor Hartman's success. The gardens were meticulously maintained, with vibrant flowers and neatly trimmed hedges leading down to a serene private lake. Every detail of the estate reflected Victor's obsession with control and perfection. Inside, the mansion was just as immaculate. The polished marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with expensive art pieces. Victor's office, located on the second floor, was the nerve center of his empire. It was here that he spent most of his time, poring over business reports and making decisions that shaped industries. Victor Hartman was a man who thrived on control. At 45, he had built a business empire that was the envy of many. His sharp mind and relentless drive had earned him respect and fear in equal measure. But his success came at a cost. Victor's personal life was a stark contrast to his professional achievements. His wife, Claire, had passed away 5 years ago, leaving him to raise their son, Liam, alone. Victor had tried to fill the void with structure and discipline, but his attempts often felt cold and distant. Liam, now 12, had grown quiet and reserved, retreating into books and video games. Victor didn't know how to connect with him, and the more he tried, the wider the gap between them seemed to grow. One evening, as Victor returned home from a long day at work, he decided to take a walk through the gardens to clear his head. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the estate. As he approached the lake, he heard the faint sound of music. Curious, he followed the melody until he reached a clearing near the water's edge. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Liam was there, moving awkwardly but enthusiastically to the rhythm of the music. Beside him was Elena Martinez, the family's maid. She was guiding Liam with gentle but firm instructions, her movements graceful and precise. Victor's initial surprise quickly turned to irritation. He had hired Elena 6 months ago, and she had always been efficient and unobtrusive. But this was unexpected. He watched as Liam stumbled, laughed, and tried again. His face lit up with a joy Victor hadn't seen in years. Victor's mind raced. Why was Elena teaching his son to dance? He had never authorized this, and he didn't like the idea of someone else influencing Liam. His irritation grew as he watched them, his fists clenching at his sides. He stepped forward, his footsteps sharp against the stone path. Elena noticed him first, her expression calm but guarded. Liam froze mid-step, his smile fading as he saw his father's stern face. "What's going on here?" Victor asked, his voice cold and controlled. Liam looked down, shuffling his feet nervously. Elena, however, met Victor's gaze without hesitation. "We were practicing, Mr. Hartman," she said simply. "Practicing what, exactly?" Victor's tone was sharp, his eyes narrowing. "Your son wanted to learn how to dance," Elena replied, her voice steady. Victor turned to Liam. "Since when?" Liam hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "For a while now." Victor's jaw tightened. He had no idea his son had been interested in dance. The realization stung, but he pushed the feeling aside. "And why didn't you tell me?" Before Liam could answer, Elena spoke. "Because he had no one to practice with." Victor's irritation flared. "This isn't your job," he said, his voice rising slightly. "No, it isn't," Elena agreed. "But he asked me to." Victor's mind raced. He didn't like this, not one bit. Something about the situation felt off, like there was a layer to it he couldn't see. "I need to speak with you," Victor said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Alone." Liam looked between them, his face filled with concern. Elena, however, remained calm. "As you wish, Mr. Hartman," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. As Victor turned and walked back toward the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Victor couldn't shake the image of Elena teaching Liam to dance. Her grace, her precision. It wasn't something you'd expect from a maid. There was something about her that didn't add up. And Victor's instincts, honed by years of business dealings, told him there was more to her story. That night, after Liam had gone to bed, Victor retreated to his office. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the soft hum of his computer. He opened his laptop and began his search. He started with the basics. Elena Martinez. At first, the results were mundane. social media profiles, a few scattered mentions in local community boards. But as he dug deeper, he found an old article from a dance magazine. The headline caught his eye. Rising star Elena Martinez disappears from the ballet world. Victor leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. He clicked on the link, and a photo of a much younger Elena appeared on the screen. She was dressed in a pristine white ballet costume, standing on a grand stage, her arms lifted in perfect form. Her expression was serene, confident, nothing like the reserved woman who worked in his kitchen. The article spoke of a prodigy, a dancer with unmatched talent. Elena had performed in prestigious theaters, had been on the brink of an international career. Critics had hailed her as the next big thing in the ballet world. But then, 7 years ago, she had vanished. No interviews, no explanations, just gone. The article speculated about the reasons: burnout, injury, personal issues, but there were no concrete answers. Victor's mind raced. Why would someone with that kind of talent abandon their future? And how did she end up here, cooking in his house? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they only raised more questions. The next morning, Victor waited until Liam had left for school before confronting Elena. He found her in the kitchen, methodically chopping vegetables. She glanced up as he entered, her expression neutral but guarded. "Mr. Hartman," she greeted, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Is there something you need?" Victor didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone and placed it on the counter, the article about her displayed on the screen. Care to explain this? For the first time since he had met her, he saw genuine surprise flicker across her face. It was brief, but it was there. She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she looked at the screen, then back at him. "You've been searching for me," she said, her voice calm but careful. Victor folded his arms. "I don't like mysteries in my home, Elena." "Who are you, really?" Elena exhaled slowly and placed the dish towel down. For a moment, he thought she might refuse to answer. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "I suppose I should have expected this," she said quietly. "You're not the type of man to let things go unanswered." Victor didn't respond. He only waited. Elena looked at the article again, her fingers brushing against the edge of the counter. "I was a dancer," she admitted. "A long time ago." Victor's gaze didn't waver. "You were more than just a dancer. You were a star. What happened?" Elena hesitated, her eyes clouded with memories. "It's complicated," she said finally. Victor leaned forward, his voice firm. "I need to know, Elena. If you're going to be around my son, I need to know the truth." Elena's expression softened, but there was a flicker of pain in her eyes. "The truth isn't always easy to hear," she said quietly. Victor's jaw tightened. "Try me." Elena took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "It's not just my story," she said. "It's about someone else too. Someone I lost." Victor's curiosity deepened. "Who?" Elena looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "My fiancé, Marco. He was a dancer too. We were supposed to take on the world together." Victor's stomach tightened. He already knew where this was going. Elena's voice broke as she continued. "But he died, and after that I couldn't dance anymore. I couldn't even hear music without feeling like a part of me had been ripped away." Victor remained silent, the weight of her words settling between them. Elena looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "So I disappeared. I left everything behind and started over. That's how I ended up here." Victor exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had expected something tragic, but not this. Not a grief so raw it had driven her to abandon her entire identity. Elena wiped her eyes, her voice steadying. "But now your son. Liam reminds me of myself at his age. He's lost, just like I was. And if I can help him find his way, maybe it's a second chance for both of us." Victor stared at her, his thoughts a whirlwind. He didn't know what to say, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. Victor sat in his office, the weight of Elena's words still heavy in the air. He had always prided himself on being a man who could handle anything. But this was different. He couldn't shake the image of Elena's tear-streaked face as she spoke about her past. He had asked her to meet him in his office after dinner. Now, as she sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, he could see the tension in her posture. She was bracing herself for what was to come. "Tell me everything," Victor said, his voice firm, but not unkind. Elena took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the floor. "It's not an easy story to tell," she said quietly. "I need to hear it," Victor replied. For Liam's sake. Elena nodded, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. I was engaged to a man named Marco, she began, her voice trembling slightly. He was a dancer too. We had trained together since we were children. We were supposed to take on the world together. Victor leaned forward, his elbows resting on his desk. What happened? Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. We were offered an international tour, a dream we had worked for our entire lives. It was everything we had ever wanted. But the day before our biggest performance, Marco was hit by a car. Victor's stomach tightened. He had expected something tragic, but not this. Not a loss so sudden and devastating. He died instantly, Elena continued, her voice breaking. One moment, he was there, and the next, he was gone. Victor watched as Elena struggled to compose herself. He had never seen her like this. So vulnerable, so raw. It was a stark contrast to the composed, efficient woman he had come to know. After that, I couldn't dance, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't even hear music without feeling like a part of me had been ripped away. Everything I had built my life around was gone. She looked up at Victor, her eyes filled with pain. So I disappeared. I left everything behind. My career, my dreams, my life. I couldn't face the world without him. Victor exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had always seen Elena as a maid, a quiet presence in his home. But now he realized she was so much more than that. She was a woman who had lost everything and was still trying to find her way back. Victor leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Elena shook her head. It's not something I like to talk about. I've spent years trying to move on, to build a new life. But when I saw Liam, I saw myself in him. He's lost, just like I was. And if I can help him find his way, maybe it's a second chance for both of us. Victor's jaw tightened. He didn't like the idea of someone else influencing his son, especially someone with such a complicated past. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the impact Elena had already had on Liam. I don't like people interfering in my family, Victor said, his voice low. Elena met his gaze, her expression unreadable. And I don't like seeing children who have forgotten how to be children. The words hit Victor like a punch to the gut. He had always prided himself on providing for Liam, on giving him everything he needed. But now, he realized, he had been blind to the one thing that mattered most, his son's happiness. Elena stood, her hands still clasped tightly in front of her. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Mr. Hartman. I just want to help Liam find his joy again. And if that means teaching him to dance, then that's what I'll do. Victor stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He didn't know what to say, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. As Elena turned to leave, Victor spoke again. Elena. She paused, looking back at him. Thank you, he said, his voice softer than usual. For telling me the truth. Elena nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips. Sometimes, the truth is all we have. And with that, she left the room, leaving Victor alone with his thoughts. The next morning, Liam stood in front of his father in the grand dining room, his hands clenched into small fists. The chandeliers above cast a warm glow over the long table, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Victor sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he watched his son shift nervously from foot to foot. Finally, Liam took a deep breath and spoke. Dad, I want to compete in a dance tournament, he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. Victor's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down. He looked at Liam, his sharp gaze locking onto his son's face. A dance tournament? He repeated, as if testing the words. Liam nodded, standing firm. Yes, I've been practicing with Elena, and she thinks I'm ready. Victor exhaled, leaning back in his chair. And when did you decide this? Liam hesitated only a second. A while ago. I've been training with Elena, and I really love it. I want to see how far I can go. Victor's mind raced. A dance tournament? It wasn't something he had ever imagined for his son. He had always envisioned Liam following in his footsteps, studying business, taking over the family empire. But dance? It seemed frivolous, unpredictable. You realize this isn't a game, Liam, Victor said, his voice firm. Competitions aren't about fun. They're about discipline, pressure, and expectations. Are you ready for that? Liam straightened his back, his eyes filled with determination. I know, Dad, and I'm ready for it. I've been working hard, and I want to give it a shot. Victor studied his son, his thoughts a whirlwind. He didn't like the idea of Liam putting himself out there, risking failure and rejection. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the fire in Liam's eyes, a fire he hadn't seen in years. Later that evening, Victor found Elena in the kitchen, carefully chopping vegetables with the precision of someone used to structure and discipline. She glanced up as he entered, already sensing why he was there. "Liam told me about the tournament," Victor said, folding his arms. Elena wiped her hands on a towel before turning to face him. "And?" Victor exhaled slowly. "I'm not sure this is a good idea. Competitions are tough, and I don't want him to get hurt." Elena studied him for a moment before speaking. "Liam has the passion, the drive, the discipline will come with time. But if you don't let him try, he'll never know what he's capable of." Victor's jaw tightened. "And what if he fails? What if he's not good enough?" Elena's lips curled slightly. "Then he'll learn. Failure is part of life, Mr. Hartman. But if you never let him take the risk, he'll never have the chance to succeed." Victor rubbed a hand over his face, his mind racing. He didn't like the idea of Liam facing failure, but he also couldn't ignore the determination in his son's eyes, or the confidence in Elena's voice. Finally, Victor exhaled and nodded. "Fine. But if he's going to do this, he does it properly. No half measures. He commits to it fully." Elena's expression softened. "I wasn't planning on going easy on him." Victor stared at her, his thoughts a whirlwind. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. The next morning, training officially began. Elena transformed from the soft-spoken maid into a strict, focused mentor. The grand ballroom of the Hartman estate, usually reserved for formal events, became their practice space. The polished wooden floors gleamed under the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Liam stood in the center of the room, his posture stiff with nervousness. Elena circled him, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Again," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. Liam nodded and began the routine they had been working on. His movements were hesitant at first, but as the music played, he started to find his rhythm. Elena watched closely, stopping him every few steps to correct his posture or foot placement. "Your arms are too stiff," she said, gently adjusting his position. "Relax. Let the music guide you." Liam tried again, his movements becoming smoother. But as he attempted a spin, he stumbled, landing awkwardly on the floor. Elena didn't scold him. Instead, she offered a hand to help him up. "Again," she said simply. Liam wiped the sweat from his brow and nodded, determination shining in his eyes. Victor watched from the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. He had never seen Liam like this. So focused, so determined. There was a fire in his son's eyes that he hadn't seen in years. As the days turned into weeks, Victor found himself drawn to the training sessions. He would linger in the doorway, watching as Elena pushed Liam to his limits. She was relentless, but there was a kindness in her strictness that Victor couldn't deny. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Liam collapsed onto the floor, panting heavily. Elena handed him a bottle of water, which he took gratefully. "You did well today," she said simply. Liam grinned up at her. "That means a lot coming from you." Victor felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy exactly, but it was close. He had always been the one to guide Liam, to teach him. But now, it was Elena who held his son's attention. Later that night, Victor sat in his office, staring at the computer screen without really seeing it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the day's training session. He had always prided himself on being a good father, on providing for Liam, on giving him everything he needed. But now, he realized, he had been blind to what Liam truly needed. Victor had been so focused on control, on perfection, that he had missed the signs of his son's unhappiness. He had thought that structure and discipline were enough, but now he saw that Liam needed more. He needed passion, creativity, and someone who believed in him. And that someone, it seemed, was Elena. Victor clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up inside him. He didn't like feeling like an outsider in his own home, but at the same time he couldn't deny the positive changes in Liam. His son was happier, more confident, more alive. The next morning, Liam came to breakfast with a troubled expression. Victor noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Liam hesitated, then pulled out his phone and handed it to Victor. On the screen was a message from a rival dancer named Diego Alvarez. "You don't stand a chance, kid. Stick to your books." Victor's jaw tightened as he read the message. He looked up at Liam, who was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped. "What are you going to do about it?" Victor asked, his voice low. Liam looked up, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know. Victor placed the phone on the table and leaned forward. Listen to me, Liam. People only try to break you down when they see you as a threat. If Diego is going out of his way to talk to you, it means he's already worried. Liam's eyes widened slightly, his posture shifting. You really think so? Victor nodded. I know so. Liam's expression hardened, and for the first time, Victor saw a spark of defiance in his son's eyes. Then I guess I'll just have to prove him wrong, Liam said, his voice steady. Victor felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by a lingering unease. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. The weeks leading up to the tournament were intense. Liam trained harder than ever, pushing himself to his limits. Elena was relentless, but her strictness was tempered with encouragement. She knew how much this meant to Liam, and she was determined to help him succeed. Victor watched from the sidelines, his emotions a whirlwind. He was proud of Liam's dedication, but he couldn't shake the fear of what might happen if his son failed. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Liam sat at the dining table, barely touching his food. Victor noticed the way his son's leg bounced beneath the table, his nerves barely contained. What's on your mind? Victor asked, his voice softer than usual. Liam hesitated before speaking. There's another dancer in the tournament. His name is Diego Alvarez. He's won 2 years in a row. Victor nodded slowly. And? Liam bit his lip. He messaged me. Told me I don't stand a chance. Victor's fingers tightened around his glass. What do you think? Liam hesitated, then admitted. I don't know. Victor leaned forward slightly. Listen to me, Liam. People only try to break you down when they see you as a threat. If Diego is going out of his way to talk to you, it means he's already worried. Liam's eyes widened slightly, his posture shifting. You really think so? Victor nodded. I know so. Liam's expression hardened, and for the first time, Victor saw a spark of defiance in his son's eyes. Then I guess I'll just have to prove him wrong, Liam said, his voice steady. The day of the tournament arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The theater was buzzing with energy, dancers warming up in the backstage area, stretching, practicing footwork, and mentally preparing for their performances. Victor and Elena accompanied Liam, their presence a steadying force. Victor had never been to a dance competition before, and the sheer scale of it all was overwhelming. But he kept his composure, focusing on Liam. Liam stood among the other dancers, adjusting the straps on his dance shoes. His hands were slightly trembling, but his expression was determined. Elena placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Breathe, she said simply. Liam exhaled slowly, nodding. I'm ready. When Liam's name was called, he stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding, the silence of the audience pressing against him like a weight. He took his position at the center, his heart beat loud in his ears. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if he failed? What if he forgot the steps? What if Diego had been right? Then he saw them in the first row, Victor and Elena, watching him with unwavering support. Victor's expression was intense, but there was no judgment, no expectation of perfection, just something steady, something real. The music began, and Liam let go. His body moved before his mind could second-guess it. The first step was precise, the second even smoother. He let the rhythm take over, every movement flowing into the next. The stage became his world, the pressure melting away. The final sequence was the most difficult, a spin and leap that he had struggled with for weeks. He braced himself, pushed off the floor, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Then he landed, light on his feet, steady. The music stopped, and for a second there was silence. Then the applause erupted, loud and thunderous. Liam stood there, chest rising and falling, his skin damp with sweat. He scanned the crowd, searching for his father and Elena. Victor was on his feet, clapping, his expression filled with pride. Elena's eyes were shining, a small smile on her lips. The results were announced soon after. And the winner of this year's competition is Diego Alvarez. The audience cheered as Diego stepped forward, his confident smirk never wavering. Liam swallowed hard, keeping his expression neutral. But before he could process the disappointment, the announcer continued. We would also like to present a special award for artistic expression, one that recognizes not just technical skill, but passion, connection, and heart. This award goes to Liam Hartman. The crowd erupted again, and Liam stepped forward, accepting the medal placed around his neck. It wasn't the first-place trophy, But as he turned toward the audience, his father's expression told him everything he needed to know. Later, as he removed his dance shoes in the dressing room, Diego approached him. "Not bad," Diego said, twirling his own trophy in his hands. "You might actually be decent next year." Liam smiled slightly. "Next year? I'm winning." Diego smirked. "We'll see about that." Outside the theater, Victor and Elena waited. When Liam finally emerged, Victor placed a hand on his shoulder. "How do you feel?" Victor asked. Liam thought for a moment before answering. "Proud." Victor nodded. "Good." As they walked toward the car, Liam glanced down at the medal in his hands. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about proving to himself that he belonged on that stage. And next time, he would be even better. Victor sat in the theater, his heart pounding as he watched Liam's performance. The way his son moved, with passion, precision, and grace, was unlike anything Victor had ever seen. For the first time, he truly understood what dance meant to Liam. As the applause filled the theater, Victor felt a mix of pride and regret. Pride in his son's courage and determination, but regret for all the years he had spent trying to control Liam's life. He realized now that his obsession with perfection had kept him from truly connecting with his son. When Liam received the special award for artistic expression, Victor felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't the first-place trophy, but it was something even more meaningful, a recognition of Liam's heart and soul. After the tournament, Victor found Elena standing by the car, her eyes still shining with pride. "Thank you," Victor said, his voice softer than usual, "for everything you've done for Liam." Elena smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "He's a remarkable boy. It was an honor to help him." Victor hesitated, then added, "And thank you for sharing your story with me. I didn't realize how much you've been through." Elena's expression softened. "Sometimes helping someone else is the best way to heal yourself. Liam gave me a second chance, just as much as I gave him one." Victor nodded, feeling a newfound respect for the woman who had become such an important part of their lives. On the drive home, Liam sat in the back seat, the medal still around his neck. He stared out the window, a small smile playing on his lips. "So," Victor said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror, "what's next?" Liam turned to his father, his eyes filled with determination. "I want to keep training, not just to win, but to get better, to express myself." Victor nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "And what about Diego?" Liam grinned. "I think we're going to be friends. He's not so bad once you get to know him." Victor chuckled, the sound surprising even himself. It was a rare moment of lightness, and it felt good. The next morning, Victor surprised Liam by joining him in the ballroom for his training session. Liam's eyes widened as his father walked in, dressed in casual clothes instead of his usual suit. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Victor shrugged, a small smile on his lips. "I thought I'd see what all the fuss is about." Elena raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She simply handed Victor a pair of dance shoes and gestured for him to join them. The session was far from perfect. Victor stumbled more than once, his movements awkward and uncoordinated. But for the first time in years, he laughed. A genuine, carefree laugh that filled the room. Liam watched his father with a mixture of surprise and delight. "You're not half bad, Dad," he teased. Victor grinned, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Don't get used to it. This is a one-time thing." But deep down, he knew it wasn't. This was the beginning of something new, a chance to connect with his son in a way he never had before. As the session ended, Victor, Elena, and Liam stood in the garden, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the estate. The sound of music filled the air as they danced together, their movements imperfect but filled with joy. For Victor, it was a moment of pure happiness, a reminder that life's best moments are the ones you can't control,